Today's video takes you inside a tense congressional hearing, where Jasmine Crockett held Chairman James Comer accountable over missing Epstein documents. Watch as Crockett methodically exposes inconsistencies, presses for answers, and turns the session into a viral moment of transparency and accountability. This isn't just politics, it's a masterclass in preparation, strategy, and calm under pressure. Stick around, you won't want to miss a second of this extraordinary showdown. The hearing room was filled with an unusual energy that day. Journalists, congressional staffers, and committee members were all bracing for a session that had already generated significant buzz. The subject matter, alone missing documents tied to Jeffrey Epstein's filtered files, was sensitive and high stakes. And everyone knew that the spotlight would fall heavily on Chairman James Comer. Jasmine Crockett arrived at the hearing with a clear strategy. Unlike some who might rely on theatrics or forceful rhetoric, she had meticulously reviewed every piece of available information. Her documents were organized, her notes precise, and her questions carefully framed to uncover truth rather than create spectacle. Still, she was aware that Comer had a reputation for deflecting difficult questions, and this session would test her ability to hold him accountable under pressure. As the hearing began, Comer opened with a prepared statement reiterating his commitment to transparency and oversight. But Crockett's eyes were sharp, her mind alert. She had no intention of letting broad statements mask specific gaps in accountability. When it was her turn to question, she leaned forward, her voice steady but incisive. "Chairman Comer," Crockett began, her tone polite yet firm. "Recent reviews indicate that several documents from the Jeffrey Epstein files were filtered and, in some cases, excluded from DOJ oversight. Can you explain why these particular documents were withheld and who authorized their omission?" The room went quiet. Even committee staffers shifted in their seats as Comer adjusted slightly, clearly caught off guard. His usual composure seemed momentarily strained. He offered vague reassurances about procedural adherence, but Crockett was ready. She methodically presented the evidence she had compiled, showing discrepancies in document release and highlighting points that required clear answers. "Chairman Comer, I understand the procedural constraints, but these documents are critical to understanding the full scope of Epstein's connections," she pressed. "Transparency demands that we clarify why DOJ oversight was not applied uniformly. Who made these decisions, and on what basis?" The tension in the room grew. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, and camera lenses captured every exchange. Crockett's approach was precise. She asked targeted questions, anticipated deflections, and maintained a calm demeanor that made it difficult for Comer to evade responsibility. Each of her inquiries built upon the last, creating a logical thread that demanded answers. Comer attempted to redirect, citing confidentiality concerns and procedural rules. But Crockett was ready to challenge these deflections with documented evidence. She pointed to letters, internal memos, and public statements that suggested inconsistencies in how the files had been handled. Her voice remained measured, but the sharpness of her questioning was undeniable. The American people deserved to know why certain files were filtered and what impact that had on ongoing investigations. Crockett continued, "If DOJ oversight was excluded in certain cases, it's imperative that we understand who made those decisions and the criteria used." Comer's responses became increasingly cautious. Each vague answer Crockett received was immediately followed by another pointed question, referencing a specific memo or timeline. The room watched as she built pressure gradually yet deliberately, leaving little room for distraction or sidestepping. By mid-session, it was clear that Crockett had shifted the dynamics. Comer, who was accustomed to controlling the narrative through prepared statements and partial disclosures, found himself cornered. Every attempt to dodge or deflect was met with precise counterpoints, and her calm, methodical approach highlighted the gaps in his explanations. Observers both in the room and following live streams recognized the moment as significant. Crockett's questioning was not just about theatrics. It was a demonstration of legal acumen, investigative preparation, and the ability to hold powerful figures accountable in a public forum. The exchanges grew more intense as Crockett linked the missing documents to broader concerns about political influence, procedural transparency, and accountability. Each question added depth to the inquiry, emphasizing not only what was missing, but also why the omissions mattered for public trust and legal integrity. By the end of Part 1, the atmosphere in the hearing room had shifted. Crockett had established herself as the focal point, systematically exposing the gaps and demanding answers that Comer had struggled to provide. Social media chatter began immediately, highlighting her calm yet relentless approach, and viewers nationwide began to recognize that this session could redefine public understanding of transparency in high-profile investigations. Crockett's methodical questioning wasn't just newsworthy, was a masterclass in strategy, preparation, and public accountability. She had set the stage for what promised to be a dramatic and revealing session, one that could leave lasting implications for congressional oversight and public perception. The hearing resumed after a brief recess, and the tension in the room was thicker than ever. Reporters and staffers buzzed quietly, exchanging glances at the moment Crockett returned to the podium. She exuded calm confidence, her notes meticulously organized, her tone measured but firm. This session would demand more than just pointed questions, would require strategy, poise, and persistence. Chairman James Comer began with his standard opening remarks, emphasizing the importance of process and his commitment to public transparency. But Crockett had already anticipated this approach. She had reviewed every public statement, every procedural explanation, and every document related to the filtered Epstein files. She was ready to connect the dots in a way that left no room for vagueness. Chairman Comer Crockett began. Leaning slightly forward, the documents in question were filtered before DOJ oversight could review them. There appeared to be discrepancies between what was reported and the full file. Could you specify who was involved in making these decisions and the exact criteria used to determine what was excluded? Comer attempted a measured response, citing confidentiality concerns and procedural constraints. He tried to pivot, focusing on broader oversight initiatives rather than the specific documents Crockett was targeting. But Crockett's preparation was evident. She had anticipated every potential deflection. Chairman, while I understand confidentiality concerns, the omissions we are addressing directly affect public understanding of the case, she replied. Transparency here is critical. The American people deserve clarity on why oversight was bypassed and what influence may have been involved. Crockett presented a visual timeline of the document's release, marking the inconsistencies and highlighting points where oversight was bypassed. Each slide was accompanied by precise citations, reinforcing the credibility of her argument. The calmness of her delivery contrasted sharply with the intensity of Comer's attempts to maintain control. Subtly putting him on the defensive, the room grew increasingly focused. Every reporter had their cameras pointed at the exchange, and live feeds quickly began circulating online. Viewers watching the session could sense that Crockett's methodical approach was gaining traction. Her questions were incisive, each building on the last, and Comer's hesitation became more noticeable with each turn as she pressed further. Crockett tied the missing documents to larger systemic concerns. Chairman Comer, she continued, the exclusion of DOJ oversight raises questions about political influence and selective transparency. These files concern matters of public safety and trust. We must understand the process fully to ensure accountability and maintain integrity. Comer's responses grew cautious. He offered reassurances that oversight was maintained where required. But Crockett had already cross-referenced these claims with public records, exposing gaps in his explanations. The effect was subtle, yet powerful. The audience could see the credibility gap. Between generic assurances and evidence-backed scrutiny, observers in the room whispered among themselves. It was clear that Crockett's strategy was working. She was not only controlling the narrative, but also compelling Comer to confront the inconsistencies directly. Each question highlighted the stakes: public trust, political accountability, and the transparent handling of sensitive information. At one point, Comer attempted to interrupt, offering a defensive remark. Crockett paused, allowing him to speak, and then responded with precise articulation. "Chairman, I'm happy to address your point, but let's examine the specific documents in question." The timeline and annotations clearly show where oversight was limited, and it is crucial we understand why. The exchange was gripping. Media commentators began noting the contrast. Crockett's.com, meticulous questioning versus Comer's increasingly constrained responses. Online, clips began circulating rapidly, with viewers praising Crockett for holding a powerful figure accountable without resorting to aggression or theatrics. Throughout the session, Crockett maintained an impressive balance. She pressed hard, asked tough questions, and refused to accept vague answers. Yet she did so with respect and professionalism. Her approach reinforced her credibility, commanding attention not through volume but through clarity, preparation, and factual rigor. By the end of Part 2, the stakes had intensified. Comer was visibly on the defensive, and Crockett had successfully highlighted key areas of concern regarding filtered documents, missing oversight, and potential political influence. The hearing was evolving into a historic moment, not just for the content, but for the display of effective, principled questioning in a high-pressure political environment. Observers understood the implications. This session could reshape how congressional hearings handle sensitive information, set a benchmark for transparency, and influence public discourse on accountability. Crockett's meticulous and composed method had turned a potentially chaotic confrontation into a powerful example of effective oversight and responsible political engagement. The third session of the hearing opened with heightened anticipation. Crockett had now firmly established her credibility, and the viral response from prior sessions had placed intense scrutiny on every word exchanged. Journalists filled the room with cameras poised. Committee staffers whispered observations, and the public watching online awaited the moment when accountability would be demanded. James Comer entered the chamber with a measured composure, aware that the stakes had shifted. The prior sessions had exposed gaps in his explanations, and the audience, both in person and online, was attentive to every nuance. Comer attempted to regain control by emphasizing procedural limitations and repeating statements about oversight. But Crockett was prepared. She had analyzed his prior remarks, cross-referenced records, and identified specific areas where answers were incomplete or inconsistent. Crockett's opening line was calm yet cutting. "Chairman Comer, yesterday we discussed several documents that were filtered before DOJ oversight. Today, I want to focus on the decision-making process behind those omissions. Can you clarify who authorized this filtering and the rationale provided?" Her words drew immediate attention. Reporters adjusted their cameras, committee members leaned forward, and even some of Comer's aides exchanged nervous glances. Comer's initial response was cautious. He acknowledged procedural authority but avoided specifying names or timelines. Crockett, however, had anticipated this. She had prepared follow-up questions with precision, citing specific memos and public statements that contradicted his general claims. "Chairman," she pressed on, "while confidentiality is important, selective oversight can have serious consequences for public accountability. The documents in question were critical for understanding the Epstein network and the broader implications for ongoing investigations. It is essential that we understand both the process and the individuals responsible." As Crockett methodically presented each piece of evidence, she maintained a calm, professional tone. Her approach forced Kumar into a corner, every vague or deflective response was met with precise evidence and pointed questions. Social media observers began commenting in real time, noting how Crockett's preparation and poise were dominating the exchange. Kumar attempted to pivot, discussing general oversight protocols and emphasizing that the Department of Justice had been informed where necessary. Crockett countered with timelines, showing inconsistencies in the notification process and highlighted instances where DOJ input was notably absent. "This is not speculation," she said firmly. "These gaps are documented. The public deserves clarity on why certain files bypassed oversight, and we need specific answers, not broad assurances." The tension in the chamber was palpable. Committee members occasionally exchanged quiet comments. Journalists furiously typed notes, and cameras captured every subtle reaction. Crockett's calm persistence was creating a ripple effect. She was not just questioning Kumar, she was reframing the narrative, shifting focus from procedural defenses to accountability and transparency. At a key moment, Crockett referenced a memo that had recently surfaced online, highlighting discrepancies between Kumar's public statements and internal communications. She laid out the timeline, pointing to the missing documents, the excluded DOJ oversight, and the potential political influence affecting the release of the files. "Chairman," she said, holding up the memo, "this directly contradicts your earlier statement about full oversight. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Kumar hesitated, and the cameras captured the pause. The moment went viral almost immediately. Online commentators praising Crockett's precision and her ability to hold a high-ranking official accountable without aggression or theatrics. Throughout the session, Crockett maintained her calm demeanor, never raising her voice. Yet her pointed questioning intensified. She balanced professionalism with pressure, ensuring that the committee, the press, and the public understood the gravity of the omissions. Her strategy was clear: systematically expose inconsistencies, demand specific answers, and let the evidence speak louder than emotion. By the end of Part 3, it was evident that Crockett had achieved something rare. She had cornered a prominent political figure on live record, exposing gaps in accountability, filtering, and oversight, all while remaining composed and credible. The session had become a defining moment, not just for the hearing, but for public discourse on transparency and political responsibility. Observers in the room commented on the contrast. Crockett's.com. Evidence-based questioning versus Kumar's cautious, defensive stance. The viral nature of the session amplified the message nationwide, sparking debates about political accountability, public trust, and the handling of sensitive documents. Crockett's strategic approach had created a turning point. Every follow-up question tightened the scrutiny. Every presentation of evidence strengthened her case, and every composed response underscored her professionalism. By the time the session adjourned, it was clear that the narrative had shifted. The focus was no longer solely on missing documents, but on the importance of accountability, preparation, and principled public service. The final day of the hearing opened with a sense of anticipation that was almost tangible. News outlets, online commentators, and congressional staff alike were focused on one thing: how Crockett would conclude her questioning of Chairman James Kumar, and whether the session would provide clarity on the missing Epstein documents. Crockett entered with her usual composed demeanor, her notes organized and her focus unwavering. The previous sessions had already established her credibility, and this was her moment to ensure that the issues of transparency, oversight, and accountability were clearly highlighted. Kumar, aware of the growing public attention and scrutiny, attempted to project confidence, emphasizing procedural constraints and confidentiality. Yet Crockett was prepared to navigate every potential deflection. She began the session with a firm, calm tone, Chairman Comer. We have now reviewed multiple documents, timelines, and statements that indicate selective oversight of the Epstein files. Today, I need specific answers. Who authorized the filtering? What criteria were applied, and why was DOJ oversight excluded in certain instances? The room fell silent as her words sank in. Committee members leaned forward. Journalists adjusted their cameras, and live streaming audiences across the country watched intently. Comer's initial response was cautious. He reiterated procedural safeguards, but avoided naming individuals or providing clear reasoning. Crockett didn't waver. She laid out the evidence point by point, linking memos, emails, and public statements to demonstrate inconsistencies. Her calm delivery highlighted the contrast between facts and vague assertions. "Chairman," she said, holding up a carefully referenced memo, "this document contradicts your previous statements about full oversight. Can you explain why this occurred and who was responsible?" Comer paused, visibly caught. For a brief moment, the tension in the chamber was almost palpable. Journalists and committee aides exchanged subtle glances. Crockett maintained her composure, allowing the question to resonate without interruption or agitation. As the session progressed, Crockett systematically connected each missing document to broader implications: public trust, political influence, and transparency. She pressed Comer on areas that had previously been overlooked, creating a web of accountability that made deflection increasingly difficult. Each time Comer attempted to sidestep, Crockett's evidence-based approach redirected the focus back to clear factual scrutiny. By mid-session, it was evident that Crockett had shifted the power dynamic. Comer, who had previously controlled the narrative through prepared statements, found himself repeatedly confronted with precise questions, timelines, and citations. The contrast between her calm, methodical approach and his cautious, defensive responses was striking. "Chairman Comer, the public deserves clarity," Crockett said, her voice steady but unwavering. Selective filtering of these files raises serious questions about political influence, procedural integrity, and accountability. It is imperative that we understand the process fully, and your detailed responses will help restore trust in this investigation. The audience, both in the chamber and online, recognized the weight of her questions. The viral nature of the prior sessions had primed viewers to pay attention, and every exchange reinforced Crockett's credibility and strategic acumen. Analysts and political commentators noted that her calm professionalism, backed by evidence, had successfully cornered a high-ranking official without confrontation or theatrics. Comer attempted a final line of defense, referencing procedural limitations and confidentiality concerns. Crockett countered with precision, connecting specific documents and memos to the points he raised, highlighting gaps in accountability. Each answer she elicited was documented, creating a clear record for the committee and the public. By the conclusion of the hearing, Crockett summarized the findings, emphasizing the need for transparency, clarity, and accountability. She highlighted the missing documents, the gaps in oversight, and the broader implications for public trust. Leaving no doubt about the gravity of the matter, Comer, visibly constrained by the methodical scrutiny, offered few additional clarifications. The contrast between his restrained responses and Crockett's composed, evidence-based strategy was evident to all observers. The session ended not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a clear demonstration of how preparation, logic, and calm professionalism can command respect and ensure accountability in even the most high-stakes political environments. As Crockett left the chamber, her team close behind, the significance of the moment was clear. The viral clips, live stream reactions, and media coverage had cemented her performance as an example of principled, strategic questioning. This was a masterclass in oversight, demanding accountability, exposing inconsistencies, and maintaining professionalism under pressure. The hearing had set a benchmark for congressional inquiry. Crockett's composure, her methodical presentation of evidence, and her refusal to let evasions go unchecked became a teaching moment for public servants, journalists, and the wider audience. Transparency, accountability, and factual clarity had triumphed, proving that calm, evidence-driven communication can have lasting impact even in highly charged political confrontations.